You know what? I still miss Devontae. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray. Doing a dive today in Packers versus Raiders, the Monday Night Football matchup coming up just a few short days from now. And of course, there is a bunch of news today. It is a Friday after all. David Bakhtiari spoke with reporters outside of his locker for about 40 minutes today. There's a big, long injury report. Of course, not the final injury report since this is Monday Night Football. So a bunch of news. And then talking about how these two teams match up, looking into the Raiders, how they're different than they were last year, but ultimately, what are they good at? What are they bad at? What can the Packers exploit as they're hoping to move to a 3-2 record before their bye? So first, let's talk injuries. It was reported earlier in the season that David Bakhtiari was going to be shut down for the year as soon as they put him on IR. The fact that there was one surgery that was a knee scope, and then there was going to be a whole nother surgery that was really going to shut him down. Well, David Bakhtiari today absolutely settled that for himself, not relying on reports, not relying on LaFleur. He actually kind of held court at his locker and invited the reporters to ask him anything and everything about his knee and the entire saga of the last 3 years. Basically, to put it short, this has been a very, very complicated manner, and he is getting another surgery, which they believe is going to fix the issue once and for all. It is not directly related to the ACL from 2020, but he is instead going to get another surgery that should finalize this one, so probably hoping to be ready for camp 2024. It just is a matter of whether the Packers retain him for 2024 or not, which is something we're going to be talking a ton more about later on in the season. And I know you have thoughts on the topic, no matter who you are. You're either pro David Bakhtiari, hater toward David Bakhtiari, ready to be done with him, ready to just move on. I understand all of it. I may not agree with all of it, but I understand every perspective on this. Maybe we just need to talk about it in a Q&A sometime. But at the end of the day, facts remain. David Bakhtiari is out for the rest of this season. So let's take a look at the full injury report for both teams. Jaire Alexander today got in a limited practice, back-to-back limited practices for him. Zane Anderson, safety, special teams ace. 2 more did not practices this week thus far. Devondre Campbell with his ankle injury. 2 more did not practices this week. His chances of playing on Monday are not looking great. Rudy Ford with an oblique injury. He returned to practice today, still in a limited capacity, but still nonetheless a very important player as we head into Monday. Elton Jenkins has been limited all week now. It looks like he's on track to play. When Matt LaFleur was asked today, what does Elton have to accomplish yet in order to make sure that he can play on Monday? LaFleur basically said, continue to make progress. All right, Matt Elton will try to do that. Aaron Jones, 2 more limited practices for him over the last couple of days. Luke Musgrave has cleared concussion protocol. He is in full practice mode. John Runyon Jr. with his sprained ankle, out of practice yesterday, limited in practice today. Appears to be on the right track to playing on Monday, but as the Packers medical team, who actually knows? Eric Stokes returning to practice certainly was a notable event earlier this week. He has been logging limited practices all week. Zach Tom limited the last 2 days. Carrington Valentine, full participation the last 2 days. And then Christian Watson limited the last 2 days as well. So a lot of injuries still on the report for the Packers, but ultimately with multiple limited practices now for Jaire, you got to believe his chances are good. I also got to believe he really wants to play against Davante Adams. So we may be seeing that. Devondre Campbell doesn't look promising there. But most of the other starters, Rudy Ford, Elton Jenkins, John Runyon Jr., Christian Watson, it looks like they're all on track to go on Monday. If Stokes returns, that would be noteworthy as well. So the Packers are finally beginning to inch their way closer and closer to a better picture of health. On the Raiders side of things, Jimmy Garoppolo, starting quarterback, he is officially going to play Monday. He has been cleared out of concussion protocol, logged a full practice today. Davante Adams has not practiced either of the last 2 days, but he doesn't need to practice. I can't envision him missing this matchup against the Packers. Max Crosby is limited the last 2 days. Looks like he's going to play for sure. And then also Jacorian Bennett, one of their corners. He's been limited the last 2 days. Nate Hobbs did not practice the last 2 days. Honestly, I couldn't find a ton about his status, about whether he's going to play or not, but he is one of their 2 starting corners for sure. So that would be a big loss for the Raiders. Malcolm Kuntz, defensive end. He's been limited the last 2 days, as has David Long, their corner. So there you have it, two very banged up teams that honestly just kind of need a break. And luckily for the Packers, they get one in week 6. So let's actually take a look now at the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'm sorry if I've already done it. I'm sorry if I'm going to do it throughout this video. My brain still defaults to Oakland Raiders. Like, I'm just being real. It's just where my brain goes. When I was prepping for this, I kept on writing down Oakland Raiders. Like, I know they don't play in Oakland. It just, if it happens, a little bit of grace for me, please. But the Raiders' record to this point, they are 1-3. They won the season opener against the Broncos, and then 3 straight losses to the Bills, the Steelers, and the Chargers. Their head coach is Josh McDaniels, 7-14 with a career record as the Raiders coach. Their offensive coordinator would be Mick Lombardi, defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, and notable for Packer fans, their wide receiver coach, former Packer coach, and running back Edgar Bennett, still hanging out there in Vegas as their wide receiver coach. Now, how are these Raiders different than last year's Raiders? And I like to summarize these things as kind of reminders of like, oh yeah, they got that guy. Well, in free agency, they lost this last offseason Denzel Perryman, Foster Moreau, Mac Hollins, Andrew Billings, who went on to sign with Chicago, and then, of course, Derek Carr now is with the Saints. But they added this offseason Jacoby Myers, wide receiver formerly of the Patriots, Jimmy Garoppolo, Austin Hooper at tight end, and Marcus Peters at corner. Then their first 4 rounds produced edge Tyree Wilson, tight end Michael Mayer, interior defensive lineman Byron Young, and quarterback Aiden O'Connell. Now, Aiden O'Connell started at quarterback for them last week in the absence of Jimmy Garoppolo due to that concussion. Played okay. Other than that, these other 3 rookies, I don't want to say they're not making huge contributions. Wilson has been playing quite a bit as a backup edge rusher for them. 2 very mixed results. But Mayer and Young have played in every game, but the contributions haven't exactly been massive to this juncture. In terms of where the Raiders rank in passing yards per game, they rank 16th in the NFL at 216.5. In terms of rushing yards per game, 65 yards per game. That is good for 32nd in the NFL, and it's not because they're just not running. It's because they can't. They get 3 yards per carry. That's it. So 65 yards per game is the bottom in the NFL. The Packers, who we've seen have not run the ball well at all and can't block for the run, like everything is broken in the Packers run game, they're still about 8 yards better than the Raiders are to this juncture, just to give you an idea of how things are going for Josh Jacobs and company. In terms of overall scoring, they put up 15.5 points per game, good for 25th in the NFL. And I will say, too, they have yet to break 20 in a game this year. And the thing is, too, everyone this week, I've seen everyone in like Packerdom kind of just dunking on the Vegas offense. And like, yeah, they don't run the ball well, but their stats from a purely statistical standpoint are not that different from Green Bay's. Green Bay only gets about 8 yards more rushing per game. Points, yes, Green Bay is favored there. I'll get to why in a little bit. Passing yards per game, Green Bay's not that far ahead. It's just when you actually watch these two offenses, one, you see like the glimmer of hope. You see the productivity and then stagnance, like it moves in waves. Whereas you watch the other one and it kind of just looks stuck. Certainly losing their starting quarterback for a week last week didn't exactly help, but the Raiders do look very stuck offensively. Defensively, how the Raiders doing? Passing yards per game, 202.8 allowed. That's 13th in the NFL. Rushing yards per game allowed, 134.3. That's 26th in the NFL. Doesn't that sound kind of familiar? Better against the pass, not good against the run. Scoring per game, they give up 25.3 points per game. That's 24th in the NFL. Again, not terribly statistically different than Green Bay, but there is one massive defensive place that these two teams are different. Green Bay has a turnover margin per game of 0.3, but a positive 0.3 means that they're just barely getting more turnovers than they are giving them away. Vegas, on the other hand, is 32nd in the NFL with a negative 2.3 turnover margin. Hey, ouch. Like, that is rough and a really good way to find yourself at 1-3. Also, it should be noted, too, that Green Bay generally gets about an extra sack per game over Vegas as well, that according to PFF. In terms of special teams, the Raiders are 25th graded per PFF in special teams. The Packers, 28th. So there you go, Rich Bisaccia's former team, 25th. His current team, 28th. We might have to start talking about that a little bit more. And then what are they really good at? Like, what do the Raiders do well? And frankly, it's all about star power when you're talking about the Raiders. Jimmy G can still throw to open receivers. There's no doubt about it. And he does so very well in the intermediate and short parts, middle of the field. That is where he has most of his completions, most of his attempts. He's thrown a couple interceptions over the middle, but that is where he operates and still does so very well to receivers who are open. And luckily for the Raiders, they happen to have Davante Adams, who still, even though he's advancing in age, still is one of the most capable receivers in the NFL, still can pop off at any given time, and still runs routes better than basically any receiver in the NFL. Jacoby Myers opposite Davante Adams has been a productive addition this year. And it's important too, even though the Raiders' run game is struggling, you can't just completely dismiss Josh Jacobs. He did lead the NFL in rushing last year. And according to like the Ben Baldwin composite rankings that I quoted about Green Bay earlier this week, the Raiders are a better run blocking offensive line than the Packers to this point. So you can't just completely they're not running the ball well at all. Part of that's on Jacobs. Part of that is on the line. There's a whole lot of finger pointing going on, no doubt about it. But it maybe isn't entirely on the offensive line, just like in Green Bay. And defensively, what are they good at? Well, they still have Mad Max. Again, continuing with the star theme. He's continuing to prove that he's one of the best edge rushers in the NFL against both the pass and the run. Thus far, according to PFF, he has 27 pressures on the season, which has resulted in 4 sacks and 21 hurries. In addition, he's 8th on the Raiders in total tackles and boasts a missed tackle rate of only 5%. That 5% would be 3rd on the Packers as well. So what are they bad at, right? Like I covered the good and then not that much. So then what's the bad? It's a little bit longer of a list. They turn the ball over a lot, at least 1 interception in every game this year, no matter who has been the quarterback. And while they do have some favorable overall yards per game from opposing quarterbacks, like they rank 13th in the NFL in that's partially because attempts against them aren't that common. They rank 13th in yards per game, but they rank 7th in pass attempts per game against them, with opposing quarterbacks only throwing the ball 30 times on average against them. In fact, their secondary, if you take the top 7 coverage snap defenders from their secondary, you get an average QB rating against them of 112.3. So to say that another way, if you're a quarterback and you're throwing against the Raiders, average it all up, they're giving up a quarterback rating of 112.3. You go, Jordan Love. You go. The Raiders defense also really doesn't tackle well, like at all. Per PFF, the Raiders are averaging just under 10 missed tackles per game. And the spots that they do tackle at seem to be both safety and then interior defensive line. But even Robert Spillane, who leads the Raider defense in overall snaps, has a missed tackle percentage of 22.5%. I have been just maligning the Packers so far, talking about how they just can't tackle. Look at the Atlanta game. Look at the last game against Detroit. The Packers can't tackle it. It's costing them games. I would just downright have a coronary at this point if I rooted for the Raiders, because they are significantly worse at it than even the Packers are. Basically, to this point, the Raiders defense, just switch it to 4-3, right? But then it's a lot like the Packers defense, except less overall talent, less athleticism, less youth. And then they don't have a guy like Quay or Devondre in the middle either. But you can get the picture. Like, it's rough, real rough defensively for the Oakland Raiders right now. And on offense, like I already mentioned, they're not great when they try to run the ball. They're in a very similar boat to Green Bay with a lot of finger pointing, not necessarily publicly, but like a lot of confusion, let's say, as to like, is it the line's fault? Is it Josh Jacobs' fault? Does he not know how to plant his foot and go forward anymore? All very similar questions to Green Bay, right? If the Packers' run defense can't stop the 32nd team in the NFL at running the ball, then we really got to chat, because then things are straight up broken defensively for the Green Bay Packers. And I know many of you are already there, but that's the truth. If you can't stop the Raiders from running the ball, you just can't stop anyone. And then in the passing game for the Raiders, they advance the ball quite a bit. Like Jimmy G's yards per game aren't even that bad, but then they don't score. They have yet to even put up 20 points in a game this year. Pair that with all the turnovers. This is a team that can move the ball, but it's like the opposite, right? Like defensively, if you're bend but don't break, like you allow some yards, but then you get a turnover or stop. The Raiders get some yards and then they hand the ball over or stop. That could play right into Green Bay's game plan, actually relatively perfectly. So what are the keys for the Green Bay Packers to win this game? Number one, simply don't let Davante Adams beat you. This is a wide receiver who I personally believe is destined for Canton. The rest of their pass catchers, they don't necessarily scare me. Yes, Jacoby Myers has been productive. Hunter Renfrow is still there, although not nearly being the receiver that he was once upon a time. So in my opinion, if there's going to be a game this year that you don't mind Jair lining up, shadowing a guy, this could be it. Now, do I think they're going to do it? Maybe some. I mean, we have seen it before, right? Jair did line up against Justin Jefferson a ton in the later game last year. So it's possible, but is it going to be every single snap, man coverage, Jair versus Davante, metal, like best versus best? No, it's not. But if there's going to be a game where you're going to trend that way, it's this one. Don't let Davante beat you. If you need to do brackets, if you need to do whatever else, force them to throw the ball to somebody else. The Packers know all too well what Davante is still capable of, even with subpar quarterback play. Number two, get after Jimmy G. 4 of his 6 interceptions have come while he's been under pressure. He's been under pressure on only 23% of his dropbacks. And if the Packers want to force mistakes from Jimmy G, like we know that they can, like they have even in the past, then they're going to have to get after him without necessarily blitzing. Win the turnover battle, and you should be able to win this game. Number 3, run the ball. And run the ball away from Max Crosby. How about we don't run it straight to the other team's best run defender? That would be a pleasant change, right? And I don't mean to sound overly negative or even overly sarcastic. It's just the truth. It's happened a lot this year. We've run the ball right into the buzzsaw of the opposing defense. So don't do that. Run it away from Max Crosby. And the thing is, even if you don't run the ball particularly well, which would be very concerning against Vegas and probably a conversation we got to have after the game, but you still have to run it to set up Jordan Love for success. You have to open up this subpar secondary you're going against. So run the ball at them. Use Aaron Jones. Use A.J. Dillon. Use anyone, but run the ball, man. And I will say too, all right, totally off topic, but I just need to say this. Matt LaFleur has mentioned that offensive line coach, that he wants offensive line coach Luke Butkus to be near him on game days now so that Luke can whisper in Matt's ear, hey, run the ball. Like, try running it sometime. Because Matt just forgets. And I've talked before. Like, I do not believe that Matt LaFleur is a bad coach by any stretch. I actually really enjoy his offensive game plan. He's really good at it. He's really well liked by players. They believe that he has their best interest at heart all the time, which is a very underrated aspect of coaching. But the thing is, what I worry about with Matt LaFleur is with him calling the plays, does he get too immersed into the game, into his own thoughts, into the fine details, and not able to step back and watch the entirety of the game like a CEO should? Like, in my personal opinion, I want my head coaches to be watching the whole deal. I don't want it to be that the Raiders have to gash the run defense 10 times before the head coach walks over to the D coordinator and says, hey, try something different. Or I don't want to have the OL coach go, hey, coach, you've passed it 12 straight times. You should run. Try it. The head coach should be the one walking around to all the other coaches saying, hey, you see this? You see what they're doing? I know you're involved in like the inner details right now in the nitty gritty, but you see what they're doing? We can work together on that. That's what I want my head coach doing. And I'm concerned that Matt LaFleur is so into his offensive philosophy, so into his game planning that he's not able to step back and see the larger trends. But in terms of creating a scheme, in terms of offensive game planning, yeah, Matt LaFleur is really good. I just don't know as if he should be the one calling all the plays when instead he's got to call all the shots. So off topic. Back to it. Last key for the Green Bay Packers. For God's sakes, come to life. This team does not travel to the West well. We know that. Going against Frisco, going against the Chargers. God, it feels like years since they've gone out west and actually played like with their hair on fire. Came out aggressive and fast and strong, right? Start the game, no huddle. Let Jordan have control of the offense. I saw discussion by very, very intelligent people earlier online saying that the Packers no longer run post-snap RPOs, that they've taken some of the decision-making away from Jordan Love. Give him the keys to the engine. Let him run the full offense. Stop putting in these confines. He is successful when they're not thinking, when all the restraints are off, when it's just go play. And that is what the Packers offense needs. Embrace your youth, embrace your athleticism, get the Raiders, not quite old, but aging defense on their heels from the get-go. You should be able to do it against this Raiders defense. If you can't, then something in the earlier game planning has to be seriously addressed. Don't be so deliberate. Release the confines and just go play. Of course, you're going to script your first 15. That's basically a requirement in modern football. So script them no huddle. Get your butts moving. Make sure you get a win on Monday night in primetime. Final prediction. The Packers are a better team than the Raiders. The Raiders have their star power, but go up and down their roster. It is not as good as the Green Bay Packers roster. So this should be a win for the Packers. It's just that simple, but they need to follow the keys. And that means that they're going to have to break some tendencies. If in this game going against a subpar opponent on Monday Night Football, a team that you've beaten for like 30 consecutive years and put up 28 points, like all the stats that I've seen online the last couple of days, and I didn't even bother quoting in this because it's not relevant to the modern game. The truth is, you've had the Raiders number forever. So if you can't do it in this game against this team, against the Raiders, who do not defend the run well, who have a high quarterback rating given up by their secondary, who turn the ball over, who can't run the ball, then you're never going to break tendency. That's worrisome. So, I got my hopes up. I love the Green Bay Packers. I don't go on these tangents, but I do. And that's the thing. It's not about being right. I want them to be successful. And this, to me, in my opinion, is how they can do it. So, Packers 31, Raiders 20. And the Packers head into the bye with a 3-2 record and a chance to finally take a break and get back to full health. Thanks so much for joining me here on Lombardi Time Brews. I swear, I do love the Packers. I promise you, I do. But join us for the watch party on Monday night. Yeah, we're going to be going through the whole game, hanging out. No one should have to watch a Packer game alone if they don't want to. The watch parties have been a ton of fun. I know some people in here will vouch for that. So stop on by. Let's have some fun watching the Packers together. And then I should note as well that right after the game on Monday night, I'm hopping into the Bleacher Report app to review winners and losers, who performed well, who did not perform well for Packers versus Raiders. So join me there as well. Thanks so much for joining me here on Lombardi Time Brews. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And as always, go Pack Go.